Want to thank Dr. Jones for a wonderful introduction this morning. Very humbled by that and humbled to be here today with you to moderate this esteemed panel. I was telling Dr. McQueen that I was thinking of her, and actually I'm thinking about all these presidents when I listened to a story about Beyonce this morning and how she never admits being tired. That when she was asked one day when she had her shoulders hunched by her mother, are you feeling tired? She said, no, I could run a mile. And I imagine this is the energy level that you must have to be a university president today. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll get to the questions. And this is in the order that I have it in the bios. So first, let me introduce Vanderbilt University Chancellor, Dr. Daniel Diermeier. An internationally renowned political scientist and management scholar, Daniel Dearmeyer is the 9th Chancellor of Vanderbilt University. Dearmeyer is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He has published 4 books and more than 100 research articles, mostly in the fields of political science, economics, and management, but also in other areas ranging from linguistics, sociology, and psychology to computer science, operations research, and applied mathematics. Prior to his position at Vanderbilt, Diermeier served in leadership and faculty roles at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, and as Dean of the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. From 2016 until 2020, he was provost of the University of Chicago, where he was responsible for all academic and research programs across the university and oversaw the university's $5 billion budget. Throughout his career, Diermeier has been an advisor to governments, nonprofits, and leading companies, mostly in the area of crisis management. He has served on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, the technology company Citybase until its acquisition by GTY Technologies, and the management board of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is currently a board member of Vanderbilt University Medical Center, the Field Museum, and Argonne National Laboratory. A native of Berlin, Germany, and a first-generation college student, Diermeier earned a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester. He also holds master's degrees in political science from the University of Munich and in philosophy from the University of Southern California. Let's welcome Dr. Diermeier. Next, allow me to introduce Belmont University President Dr. Greg Jones. Dr. Greg Jones served as the longtime dean of Duke Divinity School from 1997 to 2010, and again from 2018 until becoming Belmont's president on June 1st, 2021. Between 2010 and 2018, he served in a variety of roles, including vice president and vice provost for global strategy at Duke, and also as provost and executive vice president of Baylor University. During his time as Duke University, Dr. Jones strengthened the school's financial trajectory, diversified the faculty and staff, and led a strategic planning process that garnered great enthusiasm for the school's future. In his first 5 months at Belmont, he has secured more than $20 million in grants and gifts, launched the Belmont Data Collaborative, expanded the Bridges to Belmont program to support Metro Public School students, and established a program that more deeply connects Belmont students, faculty, and staff to the regional community to create programs that foster social good. He's the author or editor of 19 books, including the recently released Navigating the Future, co-written with Andrew P. Hogue. An ordained United Methodist minister, Dr. Jones received his bachelor's in speech communication and a master's of public administration from the University of Denver, and his master's of divinity and PhD in theology from Duke University. He currently serves on the boards of the John Templeton Foundation, the McDonald Agape Foundation, and the India Collective. Let's welcome Dr. Jones. Next, Nashville State Community College President, Dr. Shauna Jackson. Dr. Shauna Jackson began serving as president of Nashville State Community College on June 1st, 2018. Nashville State is a 6-campus comprehensive community college that serves a 7-county service region. Dr. Jackson began her career in manufacturing. An opportunity to teach business courses part-time started the path to a career in higher education that spans more than 20 years. Dr. Jackson brings to the position extensive administration, teaching, workforce, and community development experience, which includes leadership positions with Columbia State Community College, Volunteer State Community College, and South College. Actively engaged in the community, Dr. Jackson serves on the boards of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, Alignment Nashville, Second Harvest Food Bank of Middle Tennessee, Urban League of Middle Tennessee, Memorial Foundation, Combase, and the American Association for Women in Community Colleges. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc., International Women's Forum, Nashville's Agenda, and Women in Higher Education in Tennessee, where she's a presidential advisor. Dr. Jackson is a 2-time Aspen Institute College Excellence Presidential Fellow, currently in the inaugural New President's Fellowship and completing the Aspiring President's Fellowship in 2019. Dr. Jackson earned a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and an MBA from Florida A&M University and an EDD in Administration and Supervision from Tennessee State University. Let's welcome Dr. Jackson. Next, Lipscomb University President, Dr. Candice McQueen. Dr. Candice McQueen began her tenure as Lipscomb University's 18th president and first female CEO of the 130-year-old faith-based institution on September 7, 2021. After joining Lipscomb's education faculty in 2001, McQueen was appointed Dean of the College of Education in 2008 and was named Senior Vice President of the university in 2013. During her tenure as dean, she doubled the College of Education's enrollment and giving, expanded programming, and led the college to recognition at the state and national levels for excellence in teacher preparation and teaching outcomes. Dr. McQueen served as the Tennessee Commissioner of Education under former Governor Bill Haslam from 2015 to 2019, and then served as Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching, a national nonprofit that increases educator capacity across K-12 and higher education partners in over 21 states. Her primary research interests are teacher professional development, leadership in reading, and writing methods. Dr. McQueen has a Bachelor of Science degree from Lipscomb University, a Master of Education in School Administration from Peabody College at Vanderbilt University, and a PhD in Curriculum Studies from University of Texas. Let's welcome Dr. McQueen. And last but certainly not least, we have Fisk University President, Dr. Vann Newkirk. Dr. Vann Newkirk has served as Fisk University's 17th president since February 2021, a position he held on an interim basis since August 2020. He previously served as Fisk's provost and vice president for academic affairs from 2018 to 2021. Dr. Newkirk served as provost for 3 years at Elizabeth City State University before joining the Fisk team as provost in 2018. Dr. Newkirk has held numerous senior administrative and academic positions throughout his career. In addition to his administrative accomplishments, Dr. Newkirk is also a published scholar. A noted historian, Newkirk has written extensively on crime and punishment in the state of North Carolina and has also written about the history and possible future for historically black colleges and universities. Newkirk attended North Carolina A&T University, State University, and holds an undergraduate degree in sociology from Barber Scotia College, a Master of Arts degree in history from Winthrop University, a Master of Science degree in library science from North Carolina Central University, and the Doctor of Philosophy and History from Howard University. Let's welcome Dr. Newkirk. So this first question for the panelists is for all of you, and I'll start with Dr. Jackson and then go to Dr. Newkirk along the way. How do you think higher education has contributed to Nashville's growth and development in recent years, and what can your institutions do to build our communities? Dr. Jackson?
Well, I don't think it started just in the recent years. What you have here in Nashville is something that's very attractive. The title, Athens of the South, was given to this area long ago. I know for my institution, Nashville State didn't become a community college until 2002. Many people still know us as Nashville Tech. And that change opened up the door for access to thousands of people in the Nashville region to make affordable education accessible, to connect them and be able to actually have a transfer pathway to the institutions that you see here today. So what we know, especially at the community college level, is that our focus is on either workforce development and putting people to work or transferring them to these amazing institutions that are sitting here today and so many others. We are the folks that help train the workforce, and we have to partner with business and industry. And I think when you look and see all of the opportunities that our citizens have, that our residents have, and that the people moving into the community have, to not only get a really good education, but to continue to pursue education all the way to the highest level, you have something easily accessible in a community that can be resilient and change with what is needed with the workforce. So the community college very much has a mission to serve the local community and make it accessible. And because of that, when jobs change, when skills change, when there are new needs, we can be flexible and agile to respond to that. And I think the growth of Nashville is because of the opportunity for educational pathways.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Diermeier, again, the question is, what can your institutions do to build our communities?
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. It's a wonderful day, and congratulations, Dr. Jones, to this wonderful start into your tenure here at Belmont. Vanderbilt has always been an important pillar of the Nashville community. It's astonishing to me, a newcomer to the region still, relatively speaking. I started my tenure about 15 or 16 months ago now. How many people that I meet are Vanderbilt graduates and proud alums of Vanderbilt. We have played that role, over our now almost 150-year history. But I think there's also opportunities for us to do more in the Nashville community, and that includes our partnership with the other distinguished institutions of higher education in the city. We are blessed by a broad range of educational institutions in Nashville. And I think the diversity of our educational systems is a very important strength of the region, because we do need to serve different needs and we do need to serve different populations. For a research university, leading national research university like Vanderbilt, our goal, I think, needs to be much more engaged with Nashville as a community. And there are really two dimensions to this. The first one is on community engagement. I think we can do a lot more to be a partner with communities and with the city. There's tremendous assets that the university can bring to bear, anything from education to transportation. And then on the other side, we're in the middle of a very exciting period in Nashville's history. This is a boom town, we all know it. There are tremendous opportunities for innovation and for us to be helpful in further fostering the creation of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that is really something where particular research universities can play an enormously important role. We've all seen how this can happen at Stanford, where I spent some time, at Pittsburgh through Carnegie Mellon, in the Research Triangle, of course, that Dr. Jones know very well. The role that universities can play in being a partner with their city and with their community to create a vibrant, inclusive innovation system is essential, and we are proud to be an important part of trying to realize that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Dearmeyer. Dr. Lipscomb? Dr. McQueen from Lipscomb. What can your institutions do to build our communities?
I love it, Dr. Lipscomb. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for the invitation. I would first say, by the numbers, if you look at our recent 2020 regional economic development numbers, we have 125,000 students that are coming out of our 20-plus accredited institutions in the Middle Tennessee area, and 60% of them are staying. Lumina announced just a couple of years ago that this area is one of 17 nationwide talent hubs. That means we have an amazing opportunity and we can't mess it up. So one of the things we have to do is think about, beyond having access to higher education, which we certainly do very well. Second, we need to ensure that we are bringing our fantastic graduates who are now physically here and staying to the table to develop solutions to Nashville and Middle Tennessee problems. We have them. We know what they are. How are we bringing our folks to the table from our higher ed institutions who live here, have certainly been a solution in terms of getting our talent in the marketplace. Now how can we work together to make sure we talk about transportation issues, or work together on issues related to healthcare or public safety issues that we may have in our city? And so let's mobilize our talent, mobilize the talent that we have in our higher education institutions, and be more collaborative in that space. Lipscomb specifically has done a lot to be a convener. We have over 250,000 people on our campus every year in some capacity for an event or a conversation or a convening. We've really tried to open up our doors and say, we want to be part of the solution, not only for your event, but to actually sit down and talk with you about hard issues that we're all struggling with. And to do that in an institution that says we're going to bring integrity to the table, our character to the table, and really try to hash out issues together, people have really appreciated. So our value has really been in terms of getting students out, trying to make sure that we have an opportunity to work with our communities on solutions to problems, and third, being a convener of these challenging conversations.
Thank you, Dr. McQueen. Dr. Jones, community building.
Thanks. I would echo what all my colleagues have already said. If I look across the country, my former colleague at Duke, who I'm delighted is here today, Josh Yates, several years ago published a field guide to academic community partnerships in higher education, looking across the country. And it's a wonderful field guide to see how you do it well and how you do it poorly. The town-gown distinction that is often talked about is because there's often been animosity between institutions of higher education and their communities. And a lot of universities have worked hard at trying to overcome that. Unfortunately, too often that has been a transactional relationship where there's just a kind of distance but a mutual agreement to do some things together. And I think what universities need to do, and what I think all of us are committed to doing, is developing intrinsic partnerships, listening to community leaders as well as businesses and nonprofits, and developing the innovation ecosystem, working on the hard problems, the kinds of things my colleagues have already said. Those intrinsic partnerships are really important. And I think, one of the paradoxes is that Nashville's both a booming city and it's also a city that's got a lot of persistent challenges and issues. And so we need to be working together as universities and developing intrinsic partnerships, both to solve those challenges and to seize opportunities. And the more we can do that, we can actually help the whole ecosystem really develop. I just echo what Dr. McQueen said about how many students are coming here. I was doing a Zoom call with some parents of new freshmen in August from the Northeast, and there was a parent of a recent graduate, and she said all sorts of nice things about being a parent in Belmont. And then she said, "But I have one huge complaint." And I thought, uh-oh, braced myself. And she said, "Your kids won't come back. They're going to find Nashville such a wonderful place, they're going to want to stay there. And what we need to do is make sure they want to stay here in Nashville as committed citizens and help the whole area thrive and address the challenges that we need to address."
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Newkirk, again, the question is, what can your institutions do to build our communities?
Well, if you look at our institution, Fisk, we are a survivor. If you think about Nashville in the historical context of Nashville, there were once 5 private HBCUs in this city. And you had Roger Williams, Waldron University, Fisk University, Central Tennessee University. All of these colleges were right here in Nashville. And Fisk is the last institution of that type that still survives in the city. But what's important about that is that we were committed to educating and serving the underserved from the beginning. And we were bridging the gaps from that time and a time period from the early 1860s all the way up until now. But what's so important about it is that we set Nashville up to become an educational hub. And that educational hub to bring people from all around the world started right here because of those small institutions. We still continue that whole process, as my colleagues have said, of bringing people from all around the world to come to this university because of the quality education they could get from these institutions. And many of these students, and especially our students, we're a very small institution, have an enrollment of about 1,000, but our students come from 42 of the 50 states. They come from all around the world, and what we find is about 42% of our students, after they graduate, remain right here in Tennessee. They take all types of careers and jobs, and I think what we're doing is that we're training our students for the educational opportunities that are in Tennessee. We're training our students for those opportunities that could become good Tennessee citizens and taxpayers right here for this community. So I think having those collaborative partnerships with our peer institutions and our sister institutions that are sitting here are important for us. But it's important that we continue that legacy that started in 1865 of bridging the educational gaps that are still in this community, that are still in Tennessee. And we still continue that whole hope of making sure that every Tennessean has an education and an institution that's for them. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves at Fisk, and we believe that that's our commitment to this community, and that's one of the commitments that we want to maintain and continue as we grow and as this community grows.
Thank you very much. This next question, I'd like to start with Dr. Newkirk and come down to Dr. Jackson. And this alludes to what Dr. Jones was talking about the occasional animosity between universities and the communities they're in. So how do you think your institutions are currently perceived by the local community? And if you could change one thing about that perception, what would it be? Dr. Newkirk?
Well, I think in this community, and I found this very amusing when I got here, there was people that I'd gone to a doctor's office and I told them I worked at Fisk, and they didn't know where the university was located and was only 2 miles away from the doctor's office. And I think the one thing that's happened in this community is that there's been an educational divide, and that divide was North Nashville and South Nashville. And what we would like to see in this community is a more inclusive community in which all of our citizens know about our educational access and opportunities and all the institutions in the city, and making sure that our citizenry know about all these institutions. And I'd like to see that change and that perception change. I think we're making moves on that now. I'm talking and speaking about Fisk all around the city. We're putting up more information about our institution, but I think that's important to make sure that all of the citizens of this city and of this community know about all the institutions and what each institution specializes in. And I think that's something that we haven't done well as a community. We have done a lot with growth, but knowing about the educational institutions inside of our city and each one and what they actually are contributing to the community. And I think beyond some of the large institutions like Vanderbilt, I think the small institutions in some cases have gotten short shift. And I'd like to see that whole piece stop, and I'd like to see us use this momentum that we have now with the growth of the city and putting together a holistic approach so that everyone knows about the institutions. There are more collaborations, more partnerships, and I think that's what will help us to have this united front and to use education and the strength of education to grow our city and to grow the resources that are coming into this community.
Thank you, Dr. Newkirk. Dr. Jones, the question again is about perception and what you would do to change it.
Well, thanks. I think one of the great joys I've discovered is the appreciation in the broader Nashville community for Belmont. My predecessor, Bob Fisher, the namesake of this beautiful Center for the Performing Arts here, did a lot to invest in the Nashville community, and that's been terrific. Our Bridges to Belmont program that we launched about 8 years ago has developed some really strong relationships with Metro Nashville Public Schools, and I'm delighted to be able to expand that program, as we announced a few weeks ago, in partnership with Dr. Battle, and also to expand the umbrella of Bridges to Belmont to improve access and also to improve partnerships with community colleges like Nashville State and others. And so I think there's a lot of great relationships. We have good relationships with Music Row and the practitioners, with hospitals and through our College of Health Sciences and Nursing, through our law school with law firms. A lot of great relationships, and we're looking to develop that further with our new Fisk College of Medicine and be community engaged and develop those relationships. I think if there was one perception that I'd hope to change is that some people think of Belmont as a music school that's got a few other things around the edges, and adding this Performing Arts Center certainly enhances that reputation for music and the performing arts. But we have extraordinary work in health sciences and nursing, and with the new College of Medicine, with law, with science, with our new data collaborative, and entrepreneurship and cultivating an entrepreneurial mindset across all of our vocations. And so my hope is that people will see Belmont increasingly as a comprehensive university that is really engaged with partners intrinsically in the Nashville community, helping improve access and enabling Nashville and Middle Tennessee as a whole region to thrive. The last thing I'd just say is that I think our relationships in Nashville, which has been our primary focus of this conversation so far, are really important. If we're not also attending to the rural areas, it won't be good for Nashville. And so I've been talking increasingly about Middle Tennessee or the broader state, because if we want Nashville to thrive, we also need the rural areas to be thriving as well.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. McQueen, the question again is about perception, what you would change.
I think historically, and let's go back 15, 20 years, Lipscomb was seen as a small, more insular campus, and that has really changed over the last over a decade. And I give, just like Dr. Jones did, a lot of credit to my predecessor, Dr. Lowry, and the work that he did to really open up our campus and to be a thriving place where people come and innovative programs start, and we deepen our work in both research, scholarship, and certainly deepen our work in very practical solutions for workforce needs that we have in our area. You know, we have a very strong College of Business, College of Education. Our Lipscomb health programs are amazing. We've started new cybersecurity and computing technology programs. One that I'm really proud of that we have had as a thriving program for us is in our leadership and public policy area. We started a specific rural leadership program a couple of years ago, and we have partners all over the state, are working in over 50 rural counties where we are ensuring that they have leaders that are the next stage of leaders that go directly into roles that sometimes are harder to have support for at the county level or the city level. And we want to ensure that Lipscomb is seen as a place that is serving more than Nashville, but serving our state. And as Dr. Jones said, certainly our rural communities where we know that partnership is really desired and also needed. I think now we are seen as a place that is a partner, a convener. We're a place that has innovative programming, and maybe the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart, that we have very competent graduates that also have very strong character, and we hear that day after day after day from people in the workplace, and that has become a real win for our community, that when you get one of our graduates, they're going to be top-notch in their field, and they're also going to have the character, the emotional intelligence to be a strong worker, a strong partner in the work that we do collectively.
Thank you, Dr. McQueen. And Dr. Diermeier, you've written a book on reputation, so this might be right up your alley, perception of Vanderbilt and what you would change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vanderbilt, when you go back to the history of Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt really was founded, as I said, almost 150 years ago, to overcome the wounds of the Civil War by building the great University of the South. And that has been, I think, its reputation for a long time. I think my sense is that people are very proud of Vanderbilt. I mean, it's one of the nation's leading private universities, research universities. But there's also, I think, a sense that we are a little bit distant. It's that we're sitting there at this beautiful campus, but we're not as deeply connected with the community as we should be. So I think most people relate to us. They know we're there. They're proud that we're there. They may have graduates in their family that went there, and they're proud of them. But most people, I think, in Nashville relate to us either through our partners at the medical center, or because they love the Vandy boys, or they're disappointed in what their football team couldn't do on the field of play. And I think that we have an opportunity not only to be in Nashville, but of Nashville and for Nashville. I think that's a natural evolution for us, and I am very committed for us to be a more visible and more engaged member of the community in partnership with our other universities and colleges here in Nashville, but also with the business community and with community leaders. And this has been a priority for me really from day one. And then I'd like to make one more comment on, both Dr. Jones and Dr. McQueen mentioned that. It's natural for us to focus on Nashville. Nashville is doing great. Yes, there are problems, but when you look at other municipal areas in the country, we're in a great position. But I think for our sustained success and for our community, it's really hugely important that we're widening our aperture and look towards the rural regions, but also, I think, to the entire state. I think that there is a great opportunity for us to build also deeper partnerships across the state, for us with universities, with research institutions. We have a tremendous treasure in Oak Ridge National Lab that we need to be connected with. And so I think it's important to focus on our connection with Nashville, but let's not forget that we also have a thriving state and that there are opportunities to connect with the other great cities in the state and with the rural areas.
Thank you, Dr. Diermeier. Dr. Jackson, again, perception and what you would change.
There is a stigma with community colleges, and I can tell you as a high school student, I had the same. Isn't that where you go when you can't get in to the four-year? And I see and hear that a lot in Nashville. And so it wasn't until I worked at a community college that I understood what a wonderful institution we really are. And what we really are is a bridge to wherever a student wants to go. And so in Nashville, it is very clear to me, because I've worked in other colleges in Middle Tennessee, that this community college isn't held in the same high regard as a Columbia State in Columbia. And so I hope, just by being on this stage today, that we are elevating the community college conversation, because we really are the first good place that students can go. We have very highly academic talented students that come, but we have very challenging students that come to us as well. And so what we want to be is certainly that bridge to help that student get where they want to go. And so that stigma of, isn't that where you go when you can't get in, is one I wish I could completely wipe away, because I am a big supporter of fit. It really is important that the student has a good fit with the institution that they attend. And many times, students do need a smaller environment. They need to stay at home for many reasons. And we are a really great opportunity for them to build the first 2 years of a 4-year degree and stay locally and transfer to one of these institutions, or transfer to institutions out of state, or really find themselves and decide what the career is that they want to go. One of the things I think I heard Candice say is, when I think about the people that have walked through the doors at Nashville State, they have amazing stories. Our students and graduates are doing amazing things. And I can point out one from Belmont. Many of you know Milton Johnson. He started at Nashville State. And he tells me a story of how he didn't know what he really wanted to be, and he was in a class, and I hope I'm getting this right, where one teacher said, "You should be a CPA," and he said, "What is that?" Because at the community college, our faculty want to get to know the students, and we want to give them the hopes and the dreams and then the clear direction on how they can get there. So when I hear Nashville Tech, that institution is held in high regard. It was all about innovation. It was all about the latest. Nashville State Community College is not as held in high regard, and I'm intending to change that. And I think the wonderful opportunity we have with new presidents at these amazing institutions is what you're hearing: collaboration, partnerships, bridges. And so the stigma of, I'm not quite sure what that place is, do they really offer degrees? I hope and wish I could just wave that away so people could see the richness and the affordability. I mean, with Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect, and we also have a program called Nashville Grad, high school students can come to Nashville State tuition and fee free and save for the next 2 years. Many of these institutions offer wonderful transfer scholarships to our students that perform well. So that stigma is one that I would love to wipe away.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. This next question is about a theme that Dr. Jones likes to talk about a lot, which is meaningful disagreements. And I'm actually going to conclude with you. I'm going to do something, I hope you'll indulge me, starting with Dr. McQueen and going around and conclude with Dr. Jones. But college campuses are often known as sites for important conversations. In what ways do each of you attempt to encourage reasoned inquiry and meaningful disagreements? Dr. McQueen.
Yeah, love the question, and appreciate that we're having that conversation. We started several years ago at Lipscomb having conversations of significance. That's what we called them. And they were literally convenings to bring people together around hard topics. These would be topics related to, I remember one that I was heavily involved in when I was dean of the College of Education, is how do we think about immigration and undocumented students that are on our own campuses. And we made some decisions that were probably counter to what a lot of folks would think that we would have done at the time, and we were very proud that we were a forerunner in making sure all students had access to higher education. And so we would have these conversations to really be a convener in Nashville and to bring people together who wanted to talk about the issue. But what we found is it would end up influencing our decisions and the work that we would then make decisions about on campus. And so there was this mutually beneficial opportunity that occurred. We are still having those conversations of significance. I think we have determined that we will seek those opportunities proactively. Sometimes they fall in our lap, and sometimes we say, no, these are the 2 or 3 topics that we want to make sure we highlight over time. We've gotten grant dollars, research dollars to dig deeper into particular topics, some that are faith-based, some that are non-faith-based, that we continue to explore. We have a partnership actually with Fisk where we are exploring some topics around diversity with them with grant dollars, and so it has been really important for us to say we are not the experts on all topics. We have to partner, we have to talk to people who really do have expertise that we don't, and then develop some solutions. Our conversations of significance are really not just a conversation, it's then a plan. This is all about action. Once you have those, what are the 2 or 3, 4 or 5 things that you can do after the fact that your external folks who come, and then internally what we can do to make those very applicable. I'll give you a great example of something that Jeff Bezos said in an interview that I read several years ago. He said, I always get asked the question, what is the next 10 years going to look like? What are the next innovations? What's the next thing we should be doing? And he said, really what we should be asking is what's not going to change at all over the next 10 years, and really dig deep and talk about those and find better ways to do what we know isn't going to change. Now, he was talking about customers are always going to want things that are quick, delivered to them quickly. Customers are always going to want low-price solutions. Well, we've got to think about that here, and that's what we've been talking about at Lipscomb. What's not going to change that we could potentially do better and dig deeper on, that we know are challenges that we can actually convene real conversations around. And so I look forward to having folks in this audience and certainly the colleagues on this stage to continue to be part of those.
Thank you, Dr. McQueen. Dr. Dearmeyer, again, the question is about encouraging reasoned inquiry and meaningful disagreements.
I think this is one of the great challenges that universities face today. I think it's a serious issue for universities across the country. I think it's our task of university leaders to be very clear about that and to make sure that the core values of universities is that they are a place of free expression, open inquiry is maintained and is reinforced, because there are very worrying trends right now. It started out a few years ago with controversies over so-called controversial speakers, but these issues have now moved into the classroom in many universities, and they have eroded, which I think are fundamental values for universities. So the way this works now is that you pick any issue, and then usually it's a student group picks a particular point of view on that issue, a particular policy, and then conceptualizes this issue as a kind of a moral issue. So which means that either you're with me or you're against me, and if you're silent, so in other words, if you don't, in exactly the words that I tell you are with me, then you're against me, then I can call you names. And that is really divisive, and it creates polarization on our campuses. Of course, we're living in a polarized time. But universities need to be the place where we can talk about complicated, complex issues in a manner that is appropriate for the complexity of these issues. Every university should have a big sign when you walk in that says, the world is more complicated than you think. And it is our solemn responsibility is to make sure that the values that are at the very foundation of higher educations are upheld and implemented into our daily life. That is not easy right now. That requires clarity of vision, and it also requires some backbone, but it is one of the most important things we can do as leaders today.
Thank you, Dr. Diermeier. Dr. Jackson, again, encouraging reasoned inquiry and meaningful disagreements.
That looks so different as a community college and as the only state institution on this panel. As a commuter college, we really don't have the opportunity to gather students in a way that they can at the university. So most of that is happening in classrooms and teaching students how to think critically and how to have these conversations about some very difficult and opposing, polarizing topics. So many of those things are happening there. As an institution, we are really doing some hard work. We have a huge equity gap. There's a 16-point difference between how many of my white students graduate and how many of my black students graduate. And so we are doing the difficult conversations to identify systemic racism and actually call it out and talk about it. And that's been very uncomfortable on campus. And so we're trying to do it in a way that is really about one of our core values. Our core values spell LEADS, L-E-A-D-S, and L is learning. So becoming a learning community of faculty and staff and coming together to have the opportunity to learn these topics and work together. But as a state institution, we are very careful. We do have other constituents that we have to think about, but we are very committed and dedicated to making sure that our students learn how to think critically and how to really learn how to research for themselves, real reliable information, how to seek it out, and how to continue to have these discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Newkirk, again, the question is on encouraging reasoned inquiry and meaningful disagreements.
Well, I think we at Fisk, we have a long history of having meaningful discussions and starting those type of discussions. In the 1940s, we started the Race Relations Institute, which was very famous across the nation for trying to bridge those gaps and understand the differences between the races. And that institute went out of business about 10 years ago. In 2018, 2019, we restarted our Race Relations Institute and called it the Social Justice Institute. And we've gotten grant funding for that Social Justice Institute, and we've hired our first new director of the Social Justice Institute. But what we're doing with this new institute is that we're training people across the nation to understand racial divisiveness and trying to bridge those gaps. We're in Wall Street. We're training execs on Wall Street about diversity and helping them to understand. Now, we're with Marsh McLennan and helping them to understand how they can diversify their industry and how they can understand and bridge the gaps between the races. What we're also doing with our Race Relations Institute is that we're looking in Nashville at real issues with the George Floyd case across the nation and all the ramifications that came out in the discussions that our students had. We're now helping our students to understand, the fallout that happened with that case and to understand how they can actually become players in the nation. And that's helping our students to actually have a sense of being and helping our alums have a sense of being, because at Fisk, we have a long history of social activism that goes all the way back to W.B. Du Bois, Ida Wells, John Lewis, among others who've helped this nation to change itself. And we believe that our Social Justice Institute is going to help play that role in helping the nation to heal this division that we now have and to help this nation address many of the problems that we have. But what we're also trying to do with our Social Justice Institute is to partner with many of our peers that are sitting right on this stage. We are talking with people at institutions across Tennessee. We have a partnership that we just signed with Rhodes College to get them involved with this whole process of helping to bridge the gaps. We're talking with institutions such as RPI to help bridge this gap in the north and looking at where we can go as an institution. And so for us, we believe our whole purpose and our whole role is to help this nation to understand who it is and what's going on. And our Social Justice Institute and our history and our ethos are the things that we believe that are going to help us to play this role. That's an outsized role for a small institution of 1,000 students, but we believe we have the history, we have the resources, and the know-how to do those things.
Thank you, Dr. Newkirk. And Dr. Jones, this is near and dear to your heart, meaningful disagreement. As you talk about this question, would you also define for the audience what you mean when you talk about meaningful disagreement?
Well, thanks. The phrase meaningful disagreement I actually owe to John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit scholar at Georgetown in the middle decades of the 20th century. What he said was that what he longed for most in life were meaningful disagreements. And by that he meant that you'd actually had conversation with another person or other people enough to know why you disagree and where you disagree, that it's actually something that's an achievement to have that kind of conversation. And I think that's really important. Social media has created story loops where people only talk within their little circles and then presume everybody thinks the way they do, or they get their news in just one area and don't really understand or take the time to learn. I'm mindful that Abraham Lincoln in the 1830s, when he was still a lawyer before he entered politics, started subscribing to newspapers from the South because he wanted to understand on the South's own terms its views on slavery and race. And that wasn't, in the days when you could download a newspaper on your iPad, it was hard to get newspapers, but he wanted to understand others' perspectives that he disagreed with. And I think that's really crucial to help reweave the social fabric during the kind of eras and dealing with the issues that my colleagues have all talked about. At Belmont, we've hosted 2 presidential debates in the last dozen years, and mayoral debates and other kinds of debates, so that I think we've tried to be visible in promoting that kind of conversation. And like some of my other colleagues, we've got, students will be doing a Bridging the Gap conversation, Belmont students with Fisk students and Vanderbilt students this spring to explore. I want to just take a step deeper to say, like what Dr. Jackson mentioned about a learning community, I think it's also to highlight the importance of being a listening community and learning how to listen to each other well and to interpret each other charitably. That's part of what a meaningful disagreement involves, is interpreting the other with whom you disagree in the most charitable terms, rather than just rushing to a kind of judgment that overstates and makes assumptions too quickly. I'm old enough to remember the old days of 60 Minutes having point, counterpoint, and Saturday Night Live's satires of those with Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin. But we need less of that kind of shouting and hyperbolic rhetoric and more attentive listening. One of the things I've been highlighting as a distinctive opportunity for Belmont is I've been trying to say, did not use the term Christian to describe us as a university, but to describe us as a Christ-centered university. And the reason for that is Christian has become too often a term used by in the midst of debates as a weapon. And a Christ-centered focus means that if Christ is a center, I'm not, and you're not. And it leads to humility. Or ought to, at least. And what 1 Corinthians 13, that love chapter, also has this important line, we see through a glass but dimly. Now we know in part. And it's that recognition of humility that I think we really need to be cultivating. Belmont, like Lipscomb and all these other institutions that represented here, care a lot about character. And I think that's really important. And we need to make sure that we're going deep enough into themes like truthfulness and courage and humility that are really crucial to cultivating that kind of meaningful disagreement. It means you're open to learning. It means you don't know everything now. And it also means you're going to have to listen to others. And I think if we can cultivate unlikely friendships, two colleagues, Cornell West and Robbie George, are wonderful scholars who couldn't agree on much. One is a very progressive African-American Democrat. The other is a conservative white Republican. They disagree on all sorts of issues. They're also incredibly close friends. And they cultivate that meaningful disagreement. We need to be developing among our students, among our faculty, in partnerships with the community, that kind of listening and learning engagement going back and forth that cultivates unlikely friendships as a model for how to reweave the social fabric.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jones. As the Athens of the South, Nashville is a beacon of higher education with more than 20 institutions in Middle Tennessee. How do you work together and in Middle Tennessee, and how do you essentially uniquely impact the market? And again, one of the remarkable things is having 5 presidents of what could be competitive institutions, but you're here collaborating. So if you could talk about collaboration, I'd like to start with Dr. Diermeier, come to Dr. Jackson, and we'll end with Dr. McQueen. Dr. Diermeier.
Well, I think the right way to think about it is you just hinted at that. We should never think about ourselves as competitors, but as partners. We're not really competing with each other. I think we're competing both as a community, but also as an entrepreneurial, as an educational ecosystem with the coast and with other communities. The biggest challenge for us, I think, as a city, is to attract talent and then put them in an environment where they can realize their fullest potential. And having a fully developed, diverse ecosystem of institutions of higher education is absolutely essential to that. So when I look at that, I don't see myself competing with each other. I see myself to being a partnership that's competing with Austin and Charlotte and Miami and San Francisco and so forth. That's I think how we have to think about it. And we are blessed by the fact that we have so many distinguished institutions of higher learning here in Nashville. They serve different communities, they have their different strengths, and they have their different challenges. So our task as leaders is to figure out how do we best work together and how do we best work together so that we advance opportunities for Nashville.
Thank you, Dr. Dearmeyer. Dr. Jackson, again, how do you work together and uniquely impact the market?
I couldn't have said it even any better. I think what this audience needs to know, as far as Nashville State's concerned, I've had a conversation with every single one of the presidents on this panel. And there's just a new day in our region with these new presidents and the openness to consider ourselves partners, not competitors. We certainly see that there is so much opportunity in Nashville, and I think my part in how I can partner well with these folks is that this strategy of importing talent into the region is not sustainable. We have to grow our own talent. And that's where the community college, I believe, is the anchor. And so we are working very hard with Metro Schools. We have a partnership called Better Together. Many of you may not know, but we actually enroll more students from Metro Schools than MTSU and TSU put together most years. And so being the feeder of the local community, not just the traditional students, but the adults who either stopped education or never entered after high school, we become that place that helps to prepare them to go to their next step or enter the workforce. And so just having the conversation about how could we partner, and I think we're all in agreement that we will. It's the how. And so I think that there's just such an amazing opportunity for us to think about it from a systems approach. Because one of our vision statement, we've just launched internally, not externally yet, Vision 2030, a student-ready college. And those words were intentional, a student-ready college, because often, even at community colleges, for you to be successful, you have to be quote-unquote college-ready, perfectly academic prepared, you've got all the support you need, and we are going through a transformation at Nashville State to be ready for the students that come to us, your local students. And so if we can do that well in partnership with our universities, we are going to be able to really accelerate the talent pool that is needed for Nashville. So it starts with conversations that I can tell you have already begun.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Newkirk, again, how do you work together and uniquely impact the market?
Well, as my colleagues have already said, the institutions in Nashville, we all have different missions and we all have different reasons for existing. But the one thing that's important about it, if you look at the partnerships and the relationships that have been built, if you start with the Fisk Vanderbilt relationship that started in 1967, and that was a partnership to tie Fisk and some of the programs to Vanderbilt, and that's a partnership that exists today. It continued from 1967. But those type of partnerships, I'd like to see us actually grow them all across with all of these institutions. We have partnerships with Belmont University in music and several other programs, and I think those are good programs, and I'd like to see us expand that because there's so many areas that we can grow, and we can build this ecosystem that will allow us to have not only all of these great institutions, but can have the educational hub of the USA. And I think that can be done by these partnerships and the communication and the collaborations that had started earlier and that are continuing today. So I think that's where we have our real strength in these communications and the collaborations and the talks that we've started. I've met with several of the presidents on this stage, and I'd like to see us continue those meetings and to build and perhaps have some type of hub of presidents that we meet maybe monthly or bi-monthly so that we can begin to look at how we can grow and collaborate and sew these things together and weave them together and build those programs and partnerships that are going to let this city and these programs and these universities become not only the leaders in this city, but leaders across the nation.
Thank you, Dr. Newkirk. Dr. Jones, again, the question is working together and uniquely impacting the market.
Well, I'd echo what all of my colleagues thus far have said, and I would just add that the challenge is time and busy schedules, and what we really need is to make it a priority. A rising tide lifts all boats, and my colleague Charlie Apigian, the leader of our new data collaborative, was talking about collaboration in Nashville and the technology world, and he said, if you really want to see transformation, you have to have radical champions that move beyond just conversation to say, we're going to drive this. And I think it's an opportunity for us as presidents to be radical champions for collaboration in Nashville with each other and to find the innovative solutions. I was talking to a business leader who has a lot of business in Tennessee, but he also, his company is based in North Carolina, and he was visiting Nashville. And so we had a conversation, And because he knew of my ties to North Carolina, he started talking about things they're doing in North Carolina to try to create an innovative ecosystem and expand access and have industry and nonprofits and the state government and universities work together. And it got my competitive juices going, like Dr. Diermeier was saying about we're competing with Charlotte and San Francisco and LA. And I thought, oh, Tennessee can do better than North Carolina. And I thought, well, and the universities can be the ones who lead the way in developing and cultivating those kinds of partnerships. So I would hope that we here on this stage would be radical champions for that kind of collaboration for the flourishing of all people in Tennessee. Make Tennessee the exemplar for the country of how to work together.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. McQueen, the question again is, how do you work together and in what ways do you uniquely impact the market?
Well, I would mention that Chancellor Dearmeyer and the president, or VP from Swanee, and the president at Austin P were in a conversation just last week about how do we think about solving some challenges that we have in the Middle Tennessee area, and so I couldn't agree more. It starts with the president saying, I want to be a champion of these conversations. I want to actually spend the time and the energy it's going to take to put the situations, the challenges on the table and say, how can we collaborate as a university? I'm 2 months in at Lipscomb, and so I did a quick scan, and we actually have partnerships with all the universities on this stage in some fashion. Some of those are through grants, some of those are through relationships that have been forged across colleges. And so it's a pleasure to say the partnerships are real, they exist, but they have to deepen to the points that have been made. They have to be cultivated, and the president has to say, this is important to me for them to continue. And I'm proud that the three of us will be in a prayer service here soon at the invitation of one of our local religious leaders to say, how do we collectively continue being strong within our college communities, our faith communities, and work together as leaders? And I think the more we do that, the more that we know each other, and the more natural it becomes for these partnerships to occur.
Thank you very much. And we're coming soon to the conclusion of this panel, but I wanted to drive some themes that I've heard today about polarity, about misinformation, about the case for higher education, and starting with Dr. Newkirk and ending with Dr. Jackson. What is your role as a university president to uphold democracy, to fight misinformation, and also to make that case for higher education? Dr. Newkirk.
I believe I have to be a cheerleader. I think every day I go out, I've got to go out and sell the university and sell the city and sell all that we offer to the folk in the city. And I think that's important for me as the leader of Fisk University. I want to be at the drum major, the best way I can put it, in front of the band, leading the band, telling the band what songs to play as we move in throughout the city and making sure that the city hears the songs that we're playing. And I think that's going to be key for any of our educational leaders on this stage as we go forward. I think we want to build the right city. We want to build a city that's strong with strong institutions. But I think we want to make sure that everyone can hear the music that we're playing and why it's important that we play this music. And I think that's my job as president, to sell this to the city, to sell it to our constituents, to sell it to our alums and everyone out there so they can see why it's important that we exist and why it's important that we're here and why it's important that we continue this whole process each year to move forward. And so that's why I feel it's important, and that's my response on that one.
Thank you, Dr. Newkirk. Dr. Jones, again, the question is your role as president to uphold democracy, fight disinformation, and make the case for higher education.
It's an enormous topic. We could have an entire conversation just about that one question. I'll be brief and just say that there are three great transcendentals in the history of philosophy and the history of education: truth, beauty, and goodness. Higher education's not doing particularly well on any one of those three. And our society, democracy, and the world and people's character and lives depend on us doing a lot better in not just emphasizing truth, beauty, and goodness, also showing how deeply interrelated they are if we were actually to have a flourishing democracy and a broader, healthy culture.
Thank you. Dr. McQueen?
Yeah, I would answer it through the voice of somebody else. Just a few weeks ago, I was moderating a panel for the Reagan Institute, and it happened to have Governor Lee and former Governor Haslam, and a similar question was asked of them. And I remember Governor Haslam said, one poor leader can really pull what you have built for years apart. And so we have to continually be stewards of our democracy. We have to be stewards of the leadership that we put in place, and to constantly be talking at a leadership level amongst all your business leaders, higher education leaders, city leaders, county leaders, state leaders, do we have the fortitude to come forward and say, no, this is the leader that we need at this time and not the person who raises their hand? Are we really collectively thinking about that next level of leadership? And are we doing that in ways that I think the point was made earlier, where we can put the hard conversations on the table and say, what is it we need? I don't think we should take for granted the democracy we have. There are things that are happening every day, and you can see it here and abroad, that are challenges to what we have created as a country, and certainly what we've created to really put these hard conversations on the table and uphold freedom. And so the more that we are talking about it, and higher ed institutions are at the table and bringing our expertise of the people, the faculty, staff, the students who should have a voice in these matters, the better. And we should do more to get together and have those conversations. The hard conversations and making sure that we allow them to happen is critical. The first time we start censoring the hard conversations, the more and more we chip away at the freedoms that we have.
Thank you. Dr. Diermeier.
I think that universities need to be a platform and a model for civil discourse. And that civil discourse, I think, is lacking in this country right now. We're retreating to our own kind of ideological position. We're not listening to the other side. We're not trying to understand the other side. And I love Dr. Jones's concept. We're not engaging in sometimes in meaningful disagreement, where we understand where we disagree, why we disagree, but also to realize and to remember what we have in common. And I think that it's very important for universities to be the place where this happens, where it happens on difficult topics and topics that are very hard of what we're struggling with, as a country, as a region, as a region, and as a city. But the commitment to listen to each other, to have a point of view, but also the willingness to be convinced that somebody else may have better arguments, I think is essential to what universities are, but they are also essential as models of how we want to have a functioning and flourishing democracy.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson.
Well, I still believe that education is one of the strongest ladders to economic and social mobility. And although we spend a lot of time lately talking about college degrees or education as it relates to jobs, education's so much more than just the degree or the job. And so I believe it teaches people to think critically, to be good problem solvers, to work together well in teams. And so we haven't really done the best job of explaining the value of education these days. And so people are taking some of it for granted or even really standing up against it. Why do you need to go to college? And so I think really a part of our jobs as presidents is helping to redefine or talk about the value of education beyond the job opportunities, but what it really means to learn and to be able to think for yourself and to have discourse and still walk away and be civil with one another. And so I think it is a great responsibility that we are all in agreement, but I don't know that any of us have solved that particular question, but one we need to continue talking about.
Thank you very much. In the last few minutes that we have, I always like to ask my podcast for guests to leave some words of wisdom for the audience to help us get through this challenging time. Briefly, if you could offer those words of wisdom, starting with Dr. Jackson and ending with Dr. Newkirk.
If it was a bunch of students, I would just always say that success doesn't come to you, you have to go to it. And I think that's true for Nashville. We've had a chance to enjoy a lot of prosperity, and we're the it city, but I want to encourage everyone to understand that there is really a challenge before us, and it's going to take all of us to solve it. That this enjoyable region, not everyone's enjoying the prosperity. And so I think we have to think beyond ourselves and realize that our success means that we have to go to it. We've got to make it happen, and we have the right talent to do it in this region.
Thank you. Dr. Dearmeyer.
I think you saw this on display today here, but you have this tremendous diversity and richness of educational institutions in Nashville. And I think that what is the secret for us to really realizing our potential as individuals and as institutions is to be very clear about what's our mission, what our purpose is, what are the supporting values, and then act according to them. And they will not be the same. We'll serve different communities, we have different missions, we have different purposes, but to have clarity about that and then act accordingly with conviction, with wisdom, and with courage, I think is essential.
Thank you, Dr. McQueen.
Very well said, both of you. I've been struck by the tagline that I think you're using for inauguration, which is "Let Hope Abound," which I really love. Our tagline for the inauguration at Lipscomb will be a light. And they both have an interesting concept of we need to look at what the future looks like with positive hope. With the idea that there is a future that we can build. It doesn't have to happen to us. We can proactively move forward as our higher ed institutions, as people, as communities, and be much more intentional and proactive in our work. I think we are sometimes in a society where all these things are happening to us, and we begin to not have that hope. We begin to believe we can't be that light. We can't have those values and vision and actually move that forward. The answer is we can. There is nothing stopping us except for our own self-doubt. And so the way we work together, I love this conversation, and decide how we're going to be a light, how we're going to move hope forward, and how we're going to be partners is the work we have to do, and it will be the most important work we can do for the next several years.
Thank you. Dr. Jones?
Well, I would just echo that, and I think we've been in a reactive mode, both in higher education and as a culture, particularly over the last 18 months, not just with COVID, but with all sorts of issues and challenges. We need to get to being more proactive. Echoing Simon Sinek's TED Talk, I'd say start with why. And if we keep our capacity for what I call God-sized dreams, and then be sure you execute on those God-sized dreams. If you have God-sized dreams and you don't execute, you have fantasy. But if you execute without God-sized dreams, you have bureaucracy, and we have way too much fantasy and bureaucracy. And so I hope we'll start with why, with big God-sized dreams, and realize the assets we have both within our institutions, across our institutions, in partnership with Nashville, Middle Tennessee, the broader state, to really enable all of us to be radical champions for the flourishing of all people.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Newkirk?
Well, I believe that we're in a particular place in time, and I want to echo what my colleagues have said, but sometimes when you're in a particular place in time, you have to seize the moment, and I'd like to say that I'd like to leave us with this comment, build together, because I think if we could build this whole thing together and have these partnerships together, that we could move fast and we could seize the moment and we could have the strength of numbers to do things that many institutions couldn't do separately. And I think that's important for us if we're going to move forward as a region, as educational institutions, that we build together and we seize this moment and we make it happen, not as separate institutions, but as one. And I think that's the key thing that we need to think about, we need to grasp, and we need to seize that at this point in time and move forward.
Well, thank you to Dr. Vann Newkirk of Fisk University, Dr. Greg Jones of Belmont University, Dr. Candice McQueen of Lipscomb University, Dr. Daniel Diermeier of Vanderbilt University, and Dr. Shauna Jones of Nashville State Community College. Let's give them a round of applause.